Okay, so in the last video, I talked about the use of a knife and how in Warrior Flow, we look at any kind of weapon, particularly a knife, like it's an extension of our bodies, and how we kind of use weapons as a training tool to also train us to move even a little better, but also, again, to get our minds right. So same thing with a stick. I see a lot of people, they're studying different arts, different types of stick fighting, nothing wrong with that stuff. But I mean, let's be honest, this is a wooden bokken. I bought this when I was over in Japan, and I've talked about this before, but I'm going to try to relate it a little more to how I train in the body when I'm using stuff like this. And I mean, let's face it, I'm not walking down the street and all of a sudden I see trouble and, I pull this thing out and I'm ready to duel with somebody. But I like using this kind of stuff because what it does is it forces me to have to learn how to coordinate my body, how to coordinate my hands, and even allows me to work on my non-dominant side so I can kind of get it as close to being like my dominant side in terms of control. Your arms in a fight are equal. If I'm doing bench press in the gym, for example, the strength in my arms are the same. When I bench press, right, I don't go like this with my dominant arm, right? Both my arms push with equal strength. So your arms are equal in terms of a fight. I'm not asking people with their non-dominant side to do calligraphy or something like that, or, try to thread a needle. So as I'm using these different tools, what I'm doing is I'm training my body to be able to move as efficiently as possible. Because, let's face it, I'm probably not walking down the street with a bokken in my hand. Maybe, I may have a cane, but I don't think I can pull the cane thing off. But if you're a person who walks with a cane, that's a little different. The other thing is, I like to work with different types of tools and weapons, if for nothing else, than to get my body moving right and to train myself. This is, I've shown this in other videos. This is the Maasai War Club. Like I said in other videos, no well-dressed man should be without one of these. You get hit with this thing, you're going to be the first one to know it. I just had somebody fooling around with it recently, and he hit himself on the shin. Trust me, it's going to leave a mark, But the point is, using even something like this when I'm practicing, because also, too, there's a little element of danger, as I'm moving around with it, as I'm trying to get faster, worried about hitting myself. So it teaches me how to control my body. And really where I'm leading with this is how we use weapons to help improve our movement and help improve our ability to position ourselves in the right place. So for example, in the sport of baseball, golf, or whatever the case may be, or any kind of sport where people use, a racket, a bat, a club, whatever the case may be, they position themselves, whatever it is they're doing, where they need to be with the body to be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And I think that's a lost art with a lot of martial arts, where people, they get so wrapped around looking cool, with the technique, that they forget that, it's you that make technique work in a real situation. The bad guy, let's face it, he gets a vote, so he's probably not going to just stand there and let you hit him. I mean, if you can throw him off and, misdirect him and maybe get like a piece of pipe or something and hit him, great. But you can't always, depend on that kind of thing. So when I use stuff like this, I got this padded stick that I make these, and this is one of the creations of Grandmaster Perkins. Once again, just pure genius. And all this is PVC piping with the pipe insulation that you can buy in the hardware store wrapped around it, and then some Gorilla Tape, and then I put the gold on the ends just because, when I want people to focus on hitting with certain points, I like them to be able to use different ends. But the idea with something like this is now it allows me to actually hit without tearing my bag up or whatever the case may be. And it's got a little weight to it. And what I'm doing is also practicing as I'm using this to position myself where I need to be in the future. In other words, I don't just use it because, I just want to hit and make a lot of noise and do all this fancy stuff. I also use it as a tool to help me coordinate my body. So for example, if I want to hit from one side, pushing from the rear leg, I make sure I can put myself in the right position. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push to the point I need to be in the future to make that strike work. That's all I'm doing. And I push. And then I'm just timing the drop into the forward leg where I can feel myself, instantly decelerate. Feel my mass decelerate, and I'm trying to time it with my hip. Just like that. And if I want to go to the other side, now from here, I'm going to push from this leg. I'm going to bring this around. It's going to hit. All I'm doing is practicing coordinating my stepping in different positions. Almost like how you would use a samurai sword, or even other kinds of weapons. A short staff, right? And the idea behind this kind of movement is to train myself to really position myself where I need to be in the future position to be able to make it work. In other words, as I'm hitting here, it's not me swinging from here and just hitting. Not that I can't do that, obviously I have enough reach, but me actually already being in position, whereas now I only have to make one movement because I'm already where I need to be to swing. And then of course, I'm just going to go to town if I have to. The idea behind this kind of thing is training myself to feel myself position my body in the right place. As I get better at it, more proficient, I do different things, different types of strikes. Even something as simple as, like in the Marine Corps, a little bayonet fighting technique. Bayonet fighting technique works. The idea behind it is learning how to move my body in a coordinated manner where I'm not thinking about it, where I'm not tripping over my own feet, to be able to position myself so that if I do have to pick something up like this, I can use it effectively. But the other benefit, I don't want to step on that. The other benefit of it is that same basic kind of movement now helps me with my own footwork, where as I'm stepping, moving, hitting, whatever I'm doing, I'm now moving without having to think about where I got to step, how I got to step. I already know I want to be here. Whatever it is I got to do, I can do these things because I've trained myself. Along with the exercises that I do to help develop my footwork, I've trained myself to be able to do these things so that if my moment of truth arrives, the last thing I'm worried about, being on uneven surface, tripping over my own feet as I recover, is worrying about what to do with my feet, how to position my body, because I've already trained myself to do it. Anyone who's ever played sports like football, basketball, soccer, hockey, lacrosse, you name it, any kind of team sport, especially contact sports, when you're dealing with other people and you're running around, there's a million little adjustments your body is making. There's a million little things that your body is doing and tracking. Yet somehow, in all of that, we're able to do it. However, when it comes to the martial arts, for whatever reason, we act like people don't know how to do this. I see little kids playing Little League football all the time doing things that, you put your hand on your head, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this kid just did that. And yet when it comes to fighting, we act like people can't move like that, even though, again, you see little kids doing it all the time. I was watching a video the other day, not to go off on too much of a tangent, and I was watching this young woman hitting the heavy bag, and she was just going off on it. All these elbows and everything. And I mean, she looked impressive. And some people may say, oh, she's a woman and that's fast, but she was hitting with some good power. The way I saw it, and the way my crazy brain thinks is, I said, maybe she doesn't have the knockout power to knock some guy out, but I'll bet you if she had a push dagger, it'd be a bit of a problem for you. And the reason was the fluidness and speed of her movement. If she was standing right in front of you, would be very hard to deal with, especially if you weren't anticipating her doing something like that and popping you in the throat with a push dagger. I was very impressed with her movement because of the fact that she moved extremely well. I could see how she was positioning herself. It wasn't just wailing, that she was literally, you could see, because I slowed it down so I could see, you could literally see her body already shifting to the position it needed to be in to make every strike count. That's a tough thing to deal with, especially if she decides, today's the day I'm giving it up and I'm going to die a Viking warrior's death. So when you're practicing the things, when you're practicing the exercises that I show, just always be asking yourself the question, because I ask myself the same question, and that is, to do what? Why am I working with a stick? You know, I got a stick here, I got a shorter one. You know, if I'm working with a stick like this, if I'm moving my body a certain way, if I'm practicing certain footwork, I'm always asking myself to do what? Because if I'm not answering the question to do what, I'm just moving for the sake of moving. I see too much of that stuff in the martial arts and sports in general. And unfortunately, even in the military, trust me, we could have the conversations about in the military, some of the things we do. And when you ask people why do we do it, you know, the answer is always, oh, we've always done it this way, which is never a good answer to a why question. So as I'm moving, even with the stick, as I'm moving with my feet, as I'm training myself to shift and transition my balance from one root point to the next, I'm always thinking in my practice to do what? Why am I stepping here? To do, oh, I want to be able to do stuff like that. Okay, makes sense. And if you ask yourself the question in everything you do, to do what? You'll probably realize that even some of the more, how do I want to say, esoteric type of exercises, if you understand how the brain processes information and how it works, it actually builds on other things. You know, one of the things that Grandmaster Perkins, who was absolute genius, it was an absolute genius on some of this stuff, and that was, you know, this ability he had to do things that challenge your neurology. Like one of the things he would do is like pat his head and circle his hand and yodel at the same time. I can't yodel, so I'm not gonna do it. But then he would do stuff like this, and he would move his feet, and he would like switch it around, and he would just be doing stuff like this. And you may look at it and say, well, that's stupid. You know, why would you do that? But if you think of the coordination that's going on in the body, or like the other one he used to do was the split brain writing, you start realizing there's a method to the madness. All the exercises, if you understand what their purpose are, you know, something as simple as the hacky sack. People say, well, why would you do that? I don't know. When I'm here doing this on people, I can do things like that simply because I've practiced doing things like that. So when I'm in the middle of the melee and I got to reach back and grab the toaster and hit somebody in the head, I can, because I practice moving in these different positions to put myself in a position where I'm able to do stuff. So I know I threw a lot at you, but this is, like I said, this is kind of stuff I like talking about, but also it's based on questions I get all the time about people asking, you know, what is it I do in my own training? And it's really nothing different than what I tell students, but the difference is I actually put the time into practice it. And by the way, you don't have to practice any of the stuff I'm saying for long periods of time. You don't need to spend hours on it. You know, I try to get people, when they're doing stuff like this, to really make it a part of their normal movement, their normal day. Because to me, that's really mastery, right? When you can just do something, you know, where you don't have to think about it and you can be effective at it. To me, that's mastery. You know, some other people, they may say that's not mastery, but that's mastery. So hopefully you got something out of this and really got some ideas of how you can even improve your own training, even come up with some exercises on your own for yourself.